All right. Good evening, everybody. Good to be with you. Jake is out of town. Oh, right there. Jake, actually, I think he might be back in town, so he's just slacking. But Jake's out, so Daniel decided he knew more than us, and he wanted his shot to set the record straight on Ecclesiastes. Did you have a definite answer on who wrote the book?
I did not.
Oh, I thought you were like gonna be the know all everything about Ecclesiastes guy.
Not quite.
You're not an Ecclesiastes expert. Okay, is your mic on?
I don't know. Is it on?
I don't.
Let's see. Is that light on?
Can't tell. Does look like I'm kind of checking you out right now, but yeah, it should be. Yeah, there it is. I see. Okay, here we are. We're good. Last week we started a study on Ecclesiastes. Jake and I kind of built into it, and we went over chapter 1. A lot of Solomon just coming out and really, the theme was vanity. All is vanity, right? And he doesn't really change much up going into chapter 2, as we'll get to reading in just a minute. But as you look at the overarching thing, one thing Jake said last week was, a lot of people, when they read Ecclesiastes, it's just like a big-time downer. It's like, Solomon's like, nothing really matters, like, just forget it, and all this kind of stuff. And you can definitely take that perspective, but when we looked at it last week, I don't know if he's necessarily saying that. He's just trying to say, look, your life with God is got to be what you're judging things on. Mm-hmm. That's got to be your constant. That's got to be where your judgment comes from, is based on God, not on you or the people around you.
Yeah.
So as we continue to go in, it's a little harder to keep that stance because in these first few verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 2, Solomon's really going to start bringing it and explaining to people just what he means by what is vanity and how life is vanity. So we'll jump in starting in verse 1. I said to myself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure, so enjoy yourself, and behold, it was to futility. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, while my mind was gilding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is. For the sons of men do under heaven the few years of their lives. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself. I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate, a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had homeborn slaves. I also possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also I collected for myself silver and gold and treasure of kings in provinces. I provided myself male and female singers, in the pleasures of men, many concubines." So, he starts out coming out and saying, look, I've had everything. If there's something that you think that you want, guess what? I've had it. Mm-hmm. And what I've come down to is none of that stuff measures up to what your expectations are from it. And whenever I read this, me and you have talked a lot about the Enneagram, and if you guys know what the Enneagram is, it's a personality, evaluate your personality. Daniel is a 7, and one thing's with 7s, so I'm going to let you talk about this for a minute, but one thing that jumps out to me from the beginning, it's going to be a kind of recurring theme of why I think Solomon may be a 7, is because 7s are really good about building things up in their minds of how great something's going to be, and they build it up so much that when it actually happens, they're let down because they built it up in their minds so much, right? And it feels like that's what Solomon kept doing. He kept thinking, well, if I can just do this a little bigger, if I can just do this, if I can just get this, if I can just get this, then I'm going to find this happiness. I'm going to find this, pleasure in all these things. And he said in all of those things, it failed.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like, I actually haven't thought of Solomon as a 7 before, but that would make sense for this part, because the thing about that I catch myself doing a lot is like, what's the next thing?
Yeah.
It's like once you get somewhere and then it doesn't fill you, it's like, okay, well now I need to figure out where I'm going now.
Yeah.
And it just makes sense from this list because he's saying, I tried this, that didn't work, so then I moved on to this, and then that didn't work, so I built all this stuff, and then that didn't work, so then I went to here, and just to the point where he could literally say he had everything.
Yeah, and just kind of round out as he's continuing to do that, starting in verse 9. Then I became great and increased more than all of who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse him. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun.
Yeah.
So he just continues to say, look, not only did I have all these things, these indulgences of all these things, but even the things that I worked for and built up for, in the end, didn't bring happiness. It just continued to bring, folly and all these vanity that he keeps talking about. But
do you think it's kind of the key phrase in this first part, which I don't know if we're planning to get to this later, but is that at the end of every single thing that he says, it's always for myself? Or,
yeah, I think that's a big thing. And when you go back to sevens, right?
Yeah.
Sevens are very much about making sure they are happy, or that they are not put in a vulnerable, scary situation. And they do whatever they can to do that. And that's why that just jumps out to me so much as 7, because everything is about them getting what they need, their needs getting met so they can find joy. And that's what it seems like Solomon's doing. But it brings up another point for me on this that, what you'll find out, you probably already have found out, when you work with teenagers for any sort of period of time, and really it's with anybody, but we're going to let the parents think it's just the teenagers right now so they can agree with it, is, they always feel like, well, I just need to experience this to know.
Yeah.
Like, I've got to have this knowledge. I've got to have this in order to know. I've got to go experience it. And this phrase that is just gives me chills is, I need to live and learn from my mistakes. And I think Solomon, what he's doing here in these first few verses is saying, look, live and learn is not the way to go, right? Know and do is what you need to do, right? You can know God. The only real thing you can have full comfort in is God. So make sure that that diving into something you can know and do those things instead of feeling like you have to try everything to find. God's going to tell you what you can find happiness in. He's saying, look, I looked in all these things, and all these things are things that, especially as teenagers, guess what? Our adults do it too. But the world builds these things up like, this is what we got to have to be successful or to be happy. And Solomon says, look, I've had as much of this as anybody could ever have.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, it's just not where it's at. And why can't we take that? I mean, there's no dispute Solomon had all the money. The kingdom was the best it had ever been, right? He had all the power, the armies. It says, listen, I built houses, I built forests, I built vineyards, I built ponds, I built all these things, that we think of that we would want. It would just make us happy. If we could just find a piece of land that had everything we wanted on it, we would be happy. And he says, look, I've built everything that you could possibly want. I've indulged not only with that, but I've indulged in wine, in women. I've had more women than any man has ever had. Like, he goes into all these things that we think of, well, this is what's going to bring happiness. And even if it can't be done long term, I'm at least going to enjoy it in the time, and I need to experience that so I can know that it's not something I want to go to. And Solomon's like, that's just dumb. It's pretty much what he's saying. He's like, that's vanity. It doesn't matter. You can search and search and search and do and do and do, and it's not going to come out into a way that puts you at an advantage. I don't know. Anything else kind of jump out at you from these first 11 verses? I mean, he's kind of just keeps making the point over and over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the thing that I was maybe trying to question about earlier with the whole, for myself thing is as I look through this list, none of these things are inherently bad.
Right. No, definitely.
But it's more so, it seems like the part that when I read this, it's like I tried to fill myself with all of these things,
Yeah.
and it didn't make me happy.
Yes.
It didn't.
Yeah, and,
You know,
and
it is
that's a
vanity,
good point.
yeah.
And the point of vanity is it's all about you,
Yeah.
right? And that's the point he's trying to get across is the only good this is doing is for you in this little amount of time. And actually, whenever you're doing everything for yourself, you're not focusing on God, so it's actually going to be your demise.
Yeah.
He's going to get into wisdom in just a minute as we read these next few verses. I'll let you read in here in just a minute, 12 through 17. But, you know, he says and here's how he sums it up. And I don't know if there's a better way he could sum it up. In verse 10, this is what he says. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. He says, I looked at all these things, and I worked. It wasn't that I didn't work hard. I worked hard for these things. And this was the pleasures that came from my hard work. And I think a lot of times we feel like if we're going to work hard for something, then we should get to blow off some steam. We should get to be a little selfish and want to indulge in these things. Even, you know, when we serve, and it's almost like, and this is funny, it's not, because it's so true, but we feel like once we've done so many good things as a Christian, we get so many bad things we get to do. Like, I've been so good, I can afford to make some mistakes here. And I know, especially with teenagers, not adults, even though we're talking about adults too, right? Is that's their thing is I've been such a good, and I can't tell you how many times I've sat counseling with teens that are having problems with different things, and they say, you know, this whole time I've been the perfect kid. I've done everything my parents asked me to do. I've gone to church my whole life. I just want to experience these things. Shouldn't I get to? Why are all these kids getting to go out and have fun whenever they're not even good? And I respect my parents all the time, and I mess up one time, and I'm treated like I'm the worst kid in the world, right? And you see the point there, like it's like, I built up so much, I've worked so hard, I should get some slip-ups. But what Solomon says is, look, if you're doing these things so you can slip up, then you're not doing the things for the right reasons anyway, and it's not going to benefit you. Kind of what Paul says, you know, in Romans 6, you know, should I continue to sin so grace can abound? Should I, you know, because I've done so many good things, should I do some bad things so then I need the grace? No, you're going to need the grace anyway. Don't try to put things on there that doesn't come naturally. Yeah. I feel it's something that a point Solomon's trying to get across here. Mm-hmm. You want to pick up on verse 12?
Let's do it. All right, verse 12. You said through 17?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceived that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For the wise as of the fools there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and striving after the wind. It's real pick me up.
Yeah, he really is boosting the self-esteem through this, right? But as he continues to transition, you know, he's just talked about all these selfish things that not necessarily bad things, but they became bad because he was doing it for selfish reasons, right? He said, I kept doing all these things with selfish reasons. And he even takes wisdom. I don't think anyone would say that wisdom is not something that we would want to have, right? Like wisdom is a good thing. And one of the reasons that Solomon was so blessed with all these things is because when God asked him, he said he would grant him something, he asked for wisdom. And since he asked for wisdom, God gave him wisdom, made him the most wise person ever, but also gave him everything that he could ever want because of his desire for wisdom. And it's like he looks here and he says, you know, wisdom is great, and it does, just like the light is better than the darkness, it's better to be wise, but it has the same fate, right? Yeah. And he says, whether you're wise or a fool, you're going to die, and most of the things that you do are going to be forgotten. And I think sometimes it's easy to take this look and say, you know, that that he's saying the wisdom God gave him wasn't worth it. And I don't think that's anywhere close to what he's saying, right? I think he's trying to lead you down a path that says, there were many times I used my wisdom for myself and tried to do things for myself through my wisdom. And those weren't things that people were going to remember. Those were things that was going to bring me. And guess what? In the same way that the foolish man dies, I'm going to die. I'm going to die too.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, that comes back to the whole for myself.
Yeah.
You know. But I don't know. This whole idea of, I mean, we're all going to the same place.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think that this is, I guess, like, have you ever thought about that in your own personal life? Has that ever affected you? Because I know that I have, especially whenever I was thinking about, you know, what I'm going to do with my life and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, we just, you know, it doesn't matter what I do, I can't avoid that just like anybody else. And
yeah, definitely.
I mean, that is what he's getting to here.
Yeah, and I think his point there is so often we feel like the more knowledge we have, you know, that's going to allow us, you know, ability over other people to live.
Yeah.
And he says, no, your destination is still death, right?
Yeah.
And he's not speaking of, you know, eternity here.
Mm-hmm.
He's speaking of the end of your life coming. Because all these things, as we're starting to look at, and what his point is, I think, is the view of things on earth. And because the focus is so much on the things of the earth, everything on the earth has the same destination.
Yeah.
The foolish man, the wise man on the earth has the same destination. They're both going to die and return to the ground. So what happens earthly here, which is what he's speaking to, I think, really, you don't gain advantage on earth over other people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's partly what he's saying.
So if we were to zoom out and take this to the eternal perspective, do you think that changes what's being talked about here?
Yeah, I do, because, you know, he's going to get into, and that's one of the bad things about, you know, going chapter by chapter in Ecclesiastes, is because this is a specific section where he's in the middle of talking about vanity in the world and our view in the world. And as we get further on, he's going to talk more about eternity. And the reason he's saying all these things is for people to turn and look at eternity and understand that that's where we need to be focusing, you know, our decisions and our pleasures and all those things. But at this point right now, he's wanting them to understand that, and it's nothing new. I think that just kind of tells us that some things never change.
Yeah.
Because in our lives, I feel like that's something we constantly are thinking about. What can we do to make my life better here, right? And what Solomon's trying to say is, look, you can try to make your life the greatest it's ever been. If it's everything that you do that's not focused on God, isn't going to matter anyway. Yeah. It's kind of what he's getting around to.
Yeah, so it's almost like, you know, it's vanity whenever you focus all of your attention and all of your effort into the few years you have whenever you could be participating in eternity.
Yeah.
And what God is doing more so.
Do you want to keep reading, or
Sure.
you want to stick here for a minute?
Sure.
I do. We're going to come back to this in a second. The first thing you read in that, I think it's so important, but I want to read the rest before we come back to it. But it says, you know, so I turn to consider wisdom, madness, folly. For what will a man do who will come after a king except what has already been done? I think that's a really important phrase that he's going to explain a little further down.
Okay.
Starting in verse 18.
Okay. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrows, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he has given the busyness of gathering and collecting, only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after wind.
I think it's so interesting to this point where he gets, we're so focused on us, and he says, when you do that, everything that you do for you obviously isn't going to matter in the end. Mm-hmm. But sometimes people use this excuse of, well, I'm doing this for my generations to come. Yeah. One thing, and Jake is not here, but he sent a text. I'm going to give him credit for it. We just talked in the kids connection about the wise men bringing the gifts to Jesus. And gold, frankincense, and myrrh, we talked about how precious those things are. What's a 2-year-old Jesus going to do with the gold, frankincense, and myrrh? Yeah. Jake was like, what did Mary and Joseph do with the gifts? Set up a college fund for Jesus? Like, what are they doing with that? And you got to think, like, so many times we think, like, okay, if I can give this next generation goodness on earth, set them up financially, set them up to where they are taken care of. And we put so much emphasis on that we don't put enough emphasis on making sure that they know who Jesus is. Yeah. And we put so much on making sure, like, our kids have enjoyed life and have gotten to do the things that they want to do, sports, extracurriculars, vacations. We do all these things to make sure our kids have experiences. And let's not be weird about this. It's for the parents too, all those things. Sports, they get just as much out of it, unfortunately, for the kids, which is usually part of the problem, right? But whenever you do that, whenever you're focused on, okay, well, I want to take care of the next generation, Solomon says, it's the same thing. You're setting them up for the same failures you're going to have, right? What comes next, even if you built all these things up, you don't know what they're going to do with it. What you need to be giving them is what they actually need, which is knowledge of God, because He's the only one that brings, how does He put it at the end there? For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without God? Yeah. Who can do anything of good without God, but yet we focus so much on making sure our kids enjoy life that we don't allow ourselves or them to focus on what actually matters. We focus on all the vanity. And really, what Solomon says is you're setting them up for more of a failure in that, and a bigger drop down than even the fool who has nothing. Because at least they're not dropping down with the disappointment. They haven't been built up to it. And I think that's part of the overall feeling of chapter 2 is Solomon saying, the more you build up all these things, it's actually worse than the fool who has nothing, because the letdown is that much more when that stuff is all gone away and even the greatest men aren't remembered for their things. Yeah. Do
you almost get the sense from this last, 24 through the end of the chapter, I guess 26?
Yeah.
That it's almost like Solomon is just saying, slow down.
Yeah.
Kind of.
I do. One thing that me and Jake referenced last week that he was making a point of is that slow down thing. We talked about we're in a culture where we microwave things because it's so much quicker. Yeah. We talked about you because you had never used a microwave for a very long time in your life. But we're a microwave society where we want things to get done real quick, and I think that is one of the points Solomon's making. It's like slow down and make sure you're paying attention to what actually you need to pay attention to, because it's really easy to get caught up in all these things when you are going so fast you don't have time to stop and look around to see what you actually need to do.
It's like we get so busy working that we miss the point that God is always working.
Yeah. And I think that, that is a lot of the things is we get so caught up in moving, our mind moving, and focus on all these things that we build ourselves into people who are irrational on things, right? Because that's all we have focused on.
Yeah.
and what your focus is on, and if the focus is on yourself and your pleasures, Solomon says, look, I've done it all, and it's not worth it.
Yeah.
It's vanity. It's going to go away like a vapor. Mm-hmm. Vanity is kind of looked at as being being gone, a breath, a mist, right? And he says that's what all this stuff is. It's a mist. It comes and it goes, and it's not going to have any worth in the end. So, it's tough to look at what he's telling them in chapter 2 here about all these things that he's had and these experiences. Because it's not just things, right? It's experiences. It's everything that we think would be great, right? Everything we think that we need or want, he speaks of in this. And he says, without God, there is no taste. There is no, eating. There is no joy. All this stuff is just a vapor, a mist.
And isn't that so interesting? Because I feel like that is I guess a misconception I had about faith, especially during my teen years, because of all the don't do this and don't do this, to where it was like, well, how am I even supposed to live?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you're literally, I'm just being suffocated over here, to where I'm not doing anything. But then once you actually get looking at, Jesus being the source of life, and, we could talk, John 10:10 about he came so that we might have life and have it abundantly. You can even talk about Solomon here, just talking about how we should be enjoying, we should be enjoying our toil and all these things because that's a gift from God. And it seems like, the whole purpose for Jesus coming is so that we could live, and not just live, but truly live, genuinely live and genuinely find enjoyment in this life.
Next week when you get into chapter 3 is, one of those most famous chapters in the Bible because of the first few verses talking about a time for this, a time for that. But when you think about what we're talking about right now and how it has to do with our faith, with everything that's going on, we've had a lot of our luxuries taken away from us. Mm-hmm. And you see how people are reacting to that, And I think that, Solomon is speaking to a lot of us right now in this chapter because we're so worried about these earthly things that we've grown thinking that we have rights to, right? Like this is my freedom, this is my right, and I'm all for freedoms and rights. But I think it's similar to what he's speaking here of is you can have all of that. You can have all the rights you want. You can do whatever you want to. Doesn't mean anything in the end. And I think a lot of us during this time of the COVID and everything going on where we feel like things are being taken from us, we can't all worship here together, we can't do these things. And he's saying, but look at what God is continuing to give you throughout all this. Look at this time and place, if this was to happen 100 years ago, we're not getting to do live streams on YouTube. We're not getting to, have phone calls, calling people. We don't have these. And instead of being like, okay, maybe this is a time where God can use all these things that we've gotten, these privileges that we have through internet, through all these awesome things, maybe this is a time where we look at God giving us enjoyment through those things, our family with those things that we've been given, instead of looking at those things, well, I can't use it the way I want to, so it's not worth anything. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of his point is, like you said, none of these things are bad. But whenever you're using it the way you want to instead of the way God wants to, that's when it becomes vanity. That's when it becomes useless. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a time for us right now to look and see, what have we been given? What do we have in front of us? And how are we upset? Are we mad because we're not getting to use that the way we want to? Or are we really trying to use these things the way God intended for us to use?
Yeah. Man, do you have like a spark note of chapter 2?
A spark note of chapter 2, if I could say. I'll go back to the thing where it's not live and learn, right? Live and learn from your mistakes. That's the worst advice anyone can ever give you, I think. And I think Solomon's saying the same thing. It's know and do. Mm-hmm. The things that you know, the constants that you have are God. You know God can feed you. You know God can give you enjoyment. focus on the things you know and do those things instead of wanting to live the things that you don't know and learn from them through mistakes. Don't make he says, look, I made all these mistakes. You don't have to. I'm telling you right now, when you indulge in all these things, it's not going to bring you what you're actually wanting.
Yeah.
So you don't even have to try it. But that's not going to stop us, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Most of us. It just doesn't stop us. We can't turn it off in our heads. And we talk about teenagers in this way more than anybody, but they get it from somewhere, right? It's not just an instinctive thing. They get it because we do the same thing as adults where we feel like we want to experience things and we should get to experience it before we don't. We have the right to experience anything in our minds. And I think what Solomon's saying is, sure, you have the right, but you don't always need to exercise that right. Yeah. I did, and I'm telling you it's not worth it.
Yeah.
What about you? You got spark notes for it?
Depression, but
yeah, yeah. That's gonna be a common theme throughout Ecclesiastes.
No, I mean, I just love that he comes full circle at the end to actually kind of give some hope at the end.
Yeah, and that's what
of everything, because reading all this can just be a bummer, and it's so weird because we just finished Proverbs. If you're reading straight through your Bible,
right,
where it's like, there is a pattern. Like if you do this, it will be rewarded.
Right.
Like trying to seek for that wisdom, and then this in Ecclesiastes Psalms is just like, it's pointless. Like nothing matters. But I do love that he comes full circle and comes right back to God and saying that this is where you find true life and genuine life. I mean, I think that's where it would sum up for me.
I'm going to close with those last 3 verses again, and then
sounds good.
We'll give it to you guys. We'll be back next week with chapter 3 if you want to read ahead. But what you said about the hope, bringing the hope, that was one thing that Jake really tried to point out for us last week was, yes, you can easily be dragged down through this reading, and it seems like Solomon's dragging you down, but he sprinkles in that hope in there, just to keep you going throughout it. But he closes this chapter by saying, there's nothing better for a man than to eat and drink, and tell himself that labor is good. This also I have seen that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good and in his sight he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. We love you guys. Hopefully you guys have a good week. Don't forget, Steve will be starting a new study on Wednesday night at 6:30, dealing with anxiety. A lot of that is going to be talked about in Ecclesiastes too, but I know we'll enjoy it. If you have anything that you need, prayers, anything like that, please let us know. Your ministers, your elders, we want to be there for you. We want to do whatever we can for you. So remember that. Remember Wednesday night at 6:30, and I think that's all we got.
Yep.
Love you guys.
Love y'all.